In this video, we're going to talk about fall-away arrow rest. Specifically, I shoot for Hamskea, so I have the Hamskea Epsilon limb-driven fall-away on my bow today. And what I want to look at, this is going to be a specific video on how much guidance does my arrow need? How do I set my rest so that it gives my arrow enough guidance? So if we look at the purpose of a rest, I'm very purpose driven. I want to know how things work, why they work, what do I need from this piece of equipment for it to work properly. So if I'm the arrow, what do I need from the rest? I need the rest to guide me long enough until what? Until I get up enough speed, enough momentum that I can maintain that guidance, and then I don't need that rest anymore. It can get out of the way. Some people look at the fall-away rest for different purposes, maybe different levels of guidance. Some people, maybe they're used in the target world, they're used to launcher blades, and that launcher's up the whole time. And probably the problem with launcher blades that we look at is contact with our fletching. That if our fletching hits that arrow rest, that fletching could push away from that launcher blade and cause an erratic arrow flight or change my point of impact. So the first thought is we need that rest to get out of the way of the fletching. But I'm still looking at the fall-away as less contact. How much less contact can I have? Because I still believe that if I were to make a mistake during the execution of my shot and it were to change my arrow flight a little bit, then I might get more contact on that rest or less contact depending on the situation. So I want that rest to get out of the way as quickly as possible. But what is that? So if I'm the arrow, I need it to guide me long enough until I get enough speed, enough momentum to maintain that guidance. Can we put a speed on it? Well, I'm going to say it depends on the weight of the arrow and the speed of the arrow. So arguably we could say a heavier, slower arrow is going to need more guidance. A lighter, faster arrow potentially needs less guidance. So about the guidance, then what are we talking about? What am I looking for? I normally tell people 4 to 6 inches, that I want 4 to 6 inches of arrow sliding across that rest after it reaches full upright. Where I would say 4 inches on a fast arrow, an arrow that's traveling 300 foot a second or faster. A slower arrow, then it potentially needs more guidance. So closer to the 6-inch mark is what I would shoot for. So let's say an indoor arrow, probably going to push 6 to 7 inches, maybe the heavy, slow indoor arrow versus a light, fast field arrow or something like that. My testing arrow today and bow, this is my 3D bow, and I'm running a 355 grain PS23, and I'm running about 295 foot a second. So arguably, we are on the faster side of average arrows out there. So what I need might be less than somebody that's shooting a little slower and a little heavier arrow, okay? So let's keep that in mind, but I want to know what's enough. So what I've done is I've set up a hooter shooter with my bow in it, and I'm shooting at 30 yards. So I'm going to play with it. I'm going to get this arrow sighted in, and then I'm going to start playing with that rest timing. I can touch a little bit maybe on how to adjust that timing, but what you're going to see my adjustment is I'm using a spring, and the tighter I put spring tension on that rest, it keeps it down longer, which makes it come up slower or later. If I take pressure off that spring, it makes that rest come up faster. There's a lot of ways that you can adjust this rest. I don't want this video to take too long, so the focus really is what does it take for an arrow this weight and this speed, and maybe you can make an adjustment based on what you're doing based on this video to get you where you need to be, okay? So what I have on my arrow here, I've got a few marks here with a silver Sharpie. And this front mark is where my arrow is actually touching the rest at full draw. So then I come in and I put inch increments all the way back to 6 inches. So what you're going to see is when I draw the bow back, ideally for me, I typically am looking for 6 inches. So I want to see this arrow rest reach full upright at the 6-inch mark, And then as I'm drawing it back to the full draw position, 6 inches of arrow has slid across the rest after it reaches full upright. So I believe that's overkill, but what is just enough? So we're going to play with that a little bit today and see what it takes. At what point is it not enough? I want to talk for a moment about the basic fundamentals of a fall away arrow rest. Fall away arrow rest means that it falls. At some point in time, that rest falls. When does it fall? When does it need to fall? How long does it need to stay up? So the whole purpose of this video is to be able to determine what I need. How long does that rest need to stay up? How much guidance does my arrow need to maintain that guidance? Because if that rest falls too fast, as that arrow is being launched, as that string is taking off and it's getting up to speed, if that rest falls too fast, that arrow is going to sag a little bit as it's getting up enough speed to be able to maintain that guidance. So we need to make sure that we hold that arrow up where we need it to be long enough for that arrow to get enough speed, enough momentum that it can maintain that guidance, and then I don't need that rest anymore. It can get out of the way, okay? So 2 major fundamentals about the Hamskea rest that I like that causes me to choose the Hamskea rest. First, and we're really not going to talk about much, but being able to adjust the spring tension of this rest once it's at full upright. That's very important, especially as a target archer. That arrow gets a little bit of sensitivity. If I were to make a mistake during the execution of my shot, that little bit of spring tension can help absorb that. If that rest is rock hard as it's upright and that arrow hits that rest, then the rest is going to push that arrow away from that contact instead of absorb it. So it may cause a more erratic arrow flight and alter point of impact more. So being able to adjust that spring tension is really important to me as well. And I can adjust that spring tension by this little wheel underneath this lift arm. But that's not the purpose of this video. I want to talk about the rest timing, how long it's up. So another major reason why I choose the Hamskea rest over any other is because I can adjust it to what I want it to be. And I can adjust it in 2 ways. I can adjust it by spring tension here on this lift cord. So if the rest is coming up too fast and too much of my arrow is sliding across it and I want to slow that down, I can raise this little compression slide right here. I can raise it up the loop, up the lift cord, putting more tension on the spring. More tension on the spring holds the rest down longer, causes it to come up later. All right, and vice versa. If I want the rest to come up faster, I can take a little spring tension off, causing that rest to come up faster. I can also adjust where the lift cord is attached to the limb. So the limb moves the most at the axle. So as we draw our bow back, that limb is deflected and it comes down and it takes the tension off this lift cord. So the limb moves most at the axle, and then as we go away from the axle, the limb doesn't move as much. So I can play with where I attach this lift cord to the limb. So whenever I'm very first putting a rest on a bow and I'm not sure how this limb's going to react or how the rest is going to react, I might start closer to the axle, which is going to make the rest faster, meaning it's going to come up faster. So I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to come back to spring tension. But if me trying to get the timing that I want, I'm having to put too much tension on this spring that I just feel like it's excessive tension, then I can come back and I can slide this lift cord further from the axle. So how I attach this is I put 2 pieces of Velcro on the top and bottom sides of my limb. And I put about a 2-inch piece here so that I have that ability to adjust it. I also tie a little loop in this lift cord so that when it's tied, it's pinching it pretty tight on that limb. But this gives me the ability to slide it on this Velcro and it stay where I want it to be. And then I can come back and adjust the spring tension to fine tune the length of time that rest is up. So I'm drawing this back. And what we're going to do is watch this arrow rest. I apologize, this thing wobbles just a little bit. But we're going to watch that rest where it stops moving. So right there, I feel like where I have it is probably a good 6.5. If you watch it right there where it stops moving. It's stopping about right there. So it's just in front of the 6-inch mark. So now I'm going to put the clicks on and lock it in. So I'm going to come to full draw now. And I have a mark on the hooter shooter, and I can also watch where my draw stops touch the cables. Right there. So now we're going to fire an arrow. We're going to get this thing sighted in and then make an adjustment from there. Fire in the hole.
Turn the light on so I can see what can.
I wish I could hold this steady. That looks pretty close. Fire in the hole. Sooner. So I'm going to adjust the spring tension on this rest by this little locking slide right here. So what I will do is, and I put a little mark just for my test purposes so I knew where to put this. So there's a little rubber O-ring that kind of keeps this compression tight so that it can't slip. So I put a mark right here on this lift cord where I'm at right now, about 6.5 inches. All right, so what I want to do is play with that rest falling faster during the shot. So I want the rest to stay down longer, so I'm going to increase the tension on the spring. So I'm going to take this cord and slide it up higher on this lift cord, which is putting more tension on the spring. And more tension on the spring will hold that rest down longer. So then less arrow is going to slide across it at full draw. So let's see where we are right there. Full upright, right there. We're going to call that 3 inches. Let's go ahead and lock it in. We're going to fire another arrow. All right, so after the adjustment, this is arrow number 3. If you can see right here, if it's focused on this, this is my draw length mark. So I bring that right back to that mark right there. Let me make sure it's sighted in. Fire in the hole. So this is arrow number 3 after I made an adjustment to make that rest fall a little bit faster. So let's check it one more time at the same setting and let's see if we get a similar result. Okay, so this is arrow number 4 and the second arrow at the 3.5 inches. So this was arrow number 3. This arrow hit just a little bit low left, and I would venture to say when I was adjusting the sight, I felt like my pin might have been left side, so it gave me a little bit of left here. But I believe at this point, at 3.5 inches, it has already moved my point of impact. So after 2 arrows, I'm hitting just below the tape. I feel like point of impact has definitely changed between 6 inches and 3.5 inches, or 6.5 inches and 3.5 inches. I'm going to go ahead and lower it some more, make it fall faster again, and let's see where point of impact goes. Okay, so I'm going to make another adjustment to the lift cord. And what I'm going to do is raise this up a little bit more. I'm going to put a little bit more spring tension on the rest, holding the rest down a little bit longer, making it come up a little bit later or slower. right about the 1 inch mark. Right there, just for grins. That rest is full upright. I'll let it go forwards. That rest is not full upright right there. There's a little bit of movement. So I'm going to feel like we are real close to 1 inch plus. Let me put the clicks on, set my draw length, and let's fire that. All right, arrow number 5. We've only got about 1 inch of guidance before that rest falls. Fire in the hole. I'm going to say this one surprises me a little bit. This is arrow number 5 at the adjustment where we only have about 1.5 inches of arrow sliding across that rest after it reaches full upright. So it hit about the same spot as the 3.5 inches. Tell you what, I'm going to fire one more arrow right here just to confirm same point of impact. So that's 2 arrows at 1.5 inches, 2 arrows at 3.5, still below the dot. Again, I'm going to say this one surprises me a little bit. I expected this one to be lower than this. I'm going to go ahead and make the adjustment back to 6 inches and confirm that I am back in the tape or not, that we are hitting low. So what I'm going to do is let this slide down. To where my mark was at 6.5 inches. Let's confirm where we're at. I feel like that's pretty good. That's right at where I was originally, about 6.5 inches. Now I'm back in the tape at 6 inches. Let's go the other way. Let's take it to maybe 8 inches and see if it changes point of impact. So now we are at 8 to 9 inches. So here's point of impact at 8 to 9 inches. It brought our arrow back up to, I was a little bit left with my sight, but it brought the arrow back up to the original point of impact in the middle of the tape. So yesterday, after I went home from the test, I was given some thought, making sure that there was nothing else that was influencing point of impact on the target as I was playing with the timing of the rest with regards to how long it stays up or how much arrow slides across that rest after it reaches full upright. So the one thing that I thought could possibly be influencing that was knock pinch. And I'm talking about knock pinch between, I use 2 tied knots above and below my arrow knock, and then my D-loop is tied on the outside of that. And sometimes those D-loop knots will pull those tied knots tighter together and potentially pinch that knock. So I wanted to make sure that that knock pinch was not influencing point of impact or the reaction to the rest. So I came back in today, basically did the test again, set the Hooter shooter up again at 30 yards, and you may not be able to see from here, but with my rest being, the timing of my rest being set at 6.5 inches of arrow sliding across it after it reaches full upright, I shot 2 arrows and they basically went in this exact same hole right here. So then I took the bow out of the machine and I lowered my bottom knot, tied knot, and my D-loop knot so that there was no pinch at all. There was just a little bit of gap, but when I knocked my arrow, I made sure that it was up against the top knot so that it was as accurate as it was yesterday. So that's what I did. Then I shot 2 more arrows with the timing still set at 6.5 inches, and I shot these 2 arrows right here. Again, went in the exact same hole. Keep in mind, I am shooting the exact same arrow every time to make sure that's not influencing the result of the test. So little bit of difference in point of impact, but not significantly with me lowering that bottom tie. So then I went ahead and went on the extreme side of the test that I did yesterday, and I took it to about 1.5 inches. So 1.5 inches of arrow slid across the rest after it reached full upright, which is the third adjustment that I made yesterday. So, and then I fired 2 more arrows, and they basically went in this exact same hold right here below the tape. So maybe it hit a little bit lower than it did yesterday, but not much, but it's still a different point of impact from the original 6.5. So as I've played with this, I'm going to say in conclusion, I believe 4.5 inches of arrow sliding across that rest is enough guidance. The arrow gets enough speed that it can maintain that guidance. It can maintain that guidance, and then it can get out of the way. Everything that I went beyond that, I went to 6.5, I went to 8.5, 9 inches, and it didn't move my point of impact from that 4.5 inch mark. So in conclusion, for my arrow, again, keep in mind I'm running about 295. This arrow weighs about 355 grains. So it's a relatively fast setup. I feel like 4.5 inches is enough. But if I'm shooting for plenty, make sure I'm on the overkill side, more than what I need. I'm probably still going to shoot for that 6.5 inch mark. Feel like to me that's pretty good. Also knowing that as I went beyond that, it didn't move my point of impact. So I talked a little bit about too much contact. And it's hard to measure too much contact. I described maybe if I make a mistake during the execution of the shot, that could cause the arrow to impact the rest differently during the execution of the shot, and that could influence point of impact. So we can't duplicate that in the shooting machine. It's doing the exact same thing over and over again. So it's no way for me to measure that or to show you that influence. But if I still look at it, of my mindset is I need my arrow needs enough guidance. But after that, it's just potentially extra contact. So I want to make sure I give my arrow enough guidance, but then I want to minimize the contact after that. So that's me and what I look for. If all in your mind is, I want as much guidance as possible, I want that rest to stay upright as long as possible, I just want it to clear the fletching, then you can go well beyond what my test was today. So hopefully you found some good use, some good info in this video. Please hit the like button. Keep looking. I'm going to be adding a lot more videos going forwards. Thanks, you guys.